My son pinned me to the chair, and his wife chopped off the silver hair I had kept for nearly 40 years. I did not cry, but something inside me broke forever in that moment. I used to believe I was a good mother, but after that day, everything I trusted fell into a silence that froze me. Was there anything left to reclaim after trust was severed as sharply as my hair? I had just come home from the hospital. The surgery on my hip had gone well, but the recovery was slow, and every step felt like walking through water. Each movement sent ripples of pain through me, dull but relentless. The house smelled faintly of antiseptic and old wood, the kind of scent that reminded me I wasn't yet strong enough to sweep the floors, let alone defend myself. The air felt too quiet, like the kind of quiet that waits for something to go wrong. I shuffled from room to room, using the cane the hospital had sent me home with. Every step was a test, and every sigh reminded me of what I had lost, not just strength, but certainty. My reflection in the hallway mirror startled me. The woman staring back looked smaller, grayer, almost translucent. I stood there longer than I meant to, tracing the wrinkles that had deepened around my mouth, the faint bruising near my collarbone from the IV. I was still groggy from the pain meds when I heard the front door open. The familiar creak of the hinges startled me more than it should have. It was Caleb, my son, and behind him, Emily, his wife. They stepped in carrying plastic bags, reusable totes, and a nervous energy that didn't fit the smile on their faces. I hadn't seen them in almost 9 months. The last time they visited, we argued about the land. They thought I should start signing things over, but I had brushed it off. I wasn't ready then. I'm not sure I'm ready now. Still, when they walked into my living room like they belonged again, I told myself maybe they had changed. Maybe time had softened their edges. Maybe I wanted to believe that more than anything. "Hi, Mom," Caleb said, voice low and measured. He looked thinner. There were creases near his mouth I didn't remember. Emily, on the other hand, looked polished, a fresh coat of lipstick, carefully styled hair, a cardigan that matched her earrings. She had that breezy, rehearsed calm of someone who's already decided how things are going to go. "We thought we'd stay a few days," Emily said, placing her bags down beside the couch. "You shouldn't be alone right now." Alone. I heard the word echo in the corners of the room. I had been alone, yes, but not unwell, not unsafe. Still, I nodded, because arguing in that moment would have cost me too much energy. "Just until you're back on your feet," Caleb added, already glancing around, already assessing. His eyes swept across the fireplace mantel, the bookshelf, the desk in the corner. That old desk, still holding tax documents and handwritten letters, seemed to draw his gaze longer than necessary. I smiled, weakly. I said, "It's good to see you," even though I wasn't sure it was true. They made themselves at home quickly. Too quickly. Emily moved through the kitchen like she'd never left. I heard the fridge open, cabinets shut, the microwave humming to life. Caleb disappeared down the hall with his coat still on. I heard the closet door open. I heard drawers shift. The quiet, ordered world I'd returned to after the hospital began rearranging itself without my permission. That afternoon, I sat in the armchair and watched the clock. The ticking felt slower than usual. Even the dogwood tree outside the window looked like it was holding its breath. I tried to doze, but the house felt unsettled, like a guest who couldn't get comfortable. Later, as I lay in bed, I stared up at the ceiling and tried to breathe evenly. I heard footsteps again, soft, deliberate. A door opened and closed, then another. The floor creaked in a rhythm that felt too intentional to be innocent. The corners of the house no longer felt like mine. Something was shifting, quietly, beneath the surface, the way snow shifts before an avalanche.
Emily moved quickly. She kissed my cheek before I could lean away.
She called me Mom, which she never used to do. Her voice was soft, but too cheerful, like a syrup poured over something sharp. I felt her breath on my cheek before I smelled the perfume. Lavender and something sweeter, something chemical. She smiled too long, held my arm too tightly. Caleb hovered nearby, his presence quiet but heavy. He didn't speak much, just kept bringing things in from the car, pillows, a laptop bag, a carton of groceries. I watched his face closely. There was no joy in his expression, no warmth, just focus, like someone building something in his mind, step by careful step. Emily bustled around the kitchen, pulling items out of bags and cleaning drawers before I could suggest otherwise. "I got your favorite tea," she said, without asking what that was. "And Caleb picked up a few things to stock the fridge. We know how hard it can be to shop when you're healing." She didn't give me time to respond. I stood by the counter for a moment, unsure of where to put my hands, and then turned to shuffle back to my chair. My hip throbbed. It always did in the morning, but the ache had begun to settle in deeper now, like it was growing roots. That night, Emily made dinner, lemon chicken, dry and overcooked. She kept offering seconds I didn't want. "You need your strength," she said every time she passed me the plate. Caleb barely touched his food. He scrolled through something on his phone, his thumb twitching faster than his thoughts. When I asked for tea instead of dessert, Emily returned with a cup that smelled like spearmint, but there was something bitter underneath. I drank half of it out of politeness, then left it on the side table. After they had gone to bed, I made my way slowly down the hall toward the bathroom. The house was still except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. As I passed my office, I noticed the drawer of my desk cracked open, the one where I kept my property records and old legal papers. Not wide open, just a sliver. Just enough. I stood there a long time, staring at that drawer. I didn't touch it. I didn't step inside. I simply looked, then turned and walked back down the hall. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the walls breathe. At one point, I heard voices, low, urgent. Emily's voice first, sharper than usual. "She's not going to do this on her own." Then Caleb, quiet, steady. "We just need a little more time." I couldn't hear everything. I didn't need to. The words were less important than the tone. It wasn't love I heard. It was strategy. It wasn't concern. It was planning. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. My hands trembled beneath the blanket. My breathing slowed, deepened, not from peace, from training, from survival. Something had shifted. The warmth in their eyes had thinned. The way they hovered near me didn't feel like care anymore. It felt like rehearsal, like they were practicing a version of this story they would one day retell. And I was the part they needed to soften, to mold, to prepare. The next morning, Emily woke me up early. Her voice was syrupy and cheerful, the kind of tone people use when talking to children or the very old. "Let's get you freshened up a bit," she said, pulling back the covers without asking. "Your hair's gotten wild while you were in the hospital. I thought I'd help you feel a little more like yourself." I told her no, firmly, clearly. But she laughed, brushed my protest aside with a wave of her hand. "Just a trim, Mom," she said. "You'll feel so much better after." Caleb was standing in the doorway, silent, watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the space just behind my head. They were treating me like someone who couldn't say no, someone who didn't get a choice anymore. Emily led me to the kitchen, but not for breakfast. She had already set up a small towel on the back of one of the chairs, a brush and scissors laid out like tools in a surgery tray. I froze when I saw them. I said I didn't want— "You'll thank me later," she interrupted. "It's just hair."
She guided me down into the chair, her hands light but decisive on my shoulders. I could have stood. I could have pushed back, but there was something in the air, a quiet tension, Caleb's looming silence, that kept me still. Emily began brushing through my hair. It tugged at the knots, pulled at my scalp. I winced. She didn't stop. "I always thought silver hair was elegant," she said, combing harder now, "but sometimes it just needs shaping." The brush caught again, and she yanked. I gritted my teeth. I told her to stop. She didn't. Caleb stepped closer. His hand brushed my shoulder. Just a touch. A warning. Then I heard the scissors. The soft snip. The unmistakable metallic rhythm. I felt the weight of my hair fall forward, strands sliding into my lap like pieces of an identity I hadn't realized I'd still clung to. I tried to stand. Caleb pressed down. Not forcefully, but enough. Enough to say, "Stay put." Emily hummed as she worked. Not a tune, just a sound. A mask. As if she were trimming flowers or wrapping a gift. When she finished, she stepped back and tilted her head. "Much better. You look younger already." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Caleb placed a binder in front of me. The same one from before. It opened to the same page. "We can talk about this again later." But the message was clear. I was being softened, prepped, trimmed into compliance. Later that day, I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. My hair was uneven, butchered. Jagged ends clung to one side of my head, while the other was hacked close to my neck. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She looked exposed, vulnerable. I picked up the scissors they had left on the counter and with slow, shaking hands, evened out the mess as best I could. Not for vanity, for control. I gathered the fallen hair into a towel and tucked it into the drawer. Not to keep, not to remember, just to put it away. When I stepped out of the bathroom, neither of them said a word. They acted like nothing had happened, but something had. The next morning, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon. Emily was already dressed. Jeans, cardigan, hair curled and pinned. She moved through the kitchen like she was hosting a cooking segment on television, humming under her breath, plating French toast like it was a competition. Caleb sat at the table, flipping through a neat stack of manila folders. His coffee had gone cold, untouched. I entered slowly, still sore, my hip aching in the quiet way that let me know it would be a bad day. But my mind was clear. I hadn't taken the full dose of painkillers. I needed my thoughts sharp. Emily greeted me with a too bright smile. "You're just in time. I made your favorite." It wasn't. I hadn't eaten French toast in years. She placed a plate in front of me anyway. I picked at it while keeping my eyes on the stack of folders beside Caleb. I recognized the one on top. It was from my locked cabinet. The thought of keys, mine, taken, flared in my mind, then doled into something heavier. Resignation laced with quiet rage. After breakfast, Emily offered to help me outside for some air. I told her I could manage. She insisted. Her grip on my arm was too tight, firm in a way that said she wasn't asking. Just before we reached the porch, we passed my office. The door was slightly ajar. She paused mid-step, then casually reached in and pulled it shut, as if that would undo the fact that it had been open. Later that afternoon, Caleb asked if we could sit down. "Just a short talk," he said. Emily joined, carrying that same leather binder I'd seen before. They led me to the dining table and sat across from me like they were about to pitch a business plan. Caleb opened the binder. His fingers were practiced, steady. The page was already turned to a document titled Durable financial power of attorney. He began with soft words, things like, "We want to help," and "It's just a precaution." Emily chimed in with nods and affirmations. "In case there's another surgery, we just want things to be easier." Their smiles were careful, their tone warm, but everything felt scripted. I kept my hands in my lap. When I didn't respond, Emily leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her smile faltering just slightly. "I'd like to read it alone," I said, finally. My voice was even, but it surprised even me with how firm it sounded. Emily blinked. Her lips twitched like she was about to say something else, maybe argue, but she stopped herself. "Of course," she said, too quickly. Then she stood and said she'd start dinner. When she left the room, Caleb leaned in. His voice dropped to a lower register. "You've been overwhelmed lately. Managing the property, finances, it's too much for one person." I said nothing. "We spoke to the banker in town," he added. "Everything's ready. It just takes one signature." His eyes flicked toward the paper. My name was already typed at the bottom. Again, I said, "I'll read it on my own time." He didn't argue, but a muscle in his jaw flexed. That evening, I returned to my office. The drawer where I kept my files was open again, wider this time. Not everything had been removed, just moved, rearranged, like someone had rifled through my life and left it messy on purpose. On the desk sat a teacup, still warm. I hadn't made any tea. One of the folders had a sticky note on it. Caleb's handwriting. 3 words. "Let's do this." I held the folder in both hands and sat still for a long time. Something had been set in motion, and I wasn't being asked anymore. I was being maneuvered, shaped, handled. And the worst part wasn't that they were doing it at all. It was how quiet it was, how neat, how completely they expected me not to fight.
The house was too quiet the next morning. No clinking dishes, no radio playing in the kitchen, not even the usual sound of Caleb's boots on the floorboards. I dressed slowly. My body ached, but my mind was clear. I moved carefully down the hallway, each step echoing louder than it should. There was a mug of coffee on the counter, still steaming. No one in sight. Then, Emily emerged from the hallway, her hair pulled back tight, her face fully made up, as if she were preparing for an interview. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Morning," she said lightly. "We just have one more thing to go over today. Caleb made an appointment, and it'd be best to get everything squared away." I told her I didn't feel well, that my hip hurt, that I hadn't slept. Her smile faltered for a heartbeat, then recovered. She stepped behind me and gently placed her hands on my shoulders. "I'd feel better once things are settled," she said, her voice like syrup. Caleb entered the room carrying the leather binder. Again, his steps were soft, measured. He said nothing, just opened it on the coffee table and gestured to the same document, Durable Financial Power of Attorney. I didn't move. Emily brought over a hairbrush. "Let's fix you up a bit. You'll want to look presentable if Caleb takes a photo for the lawyer." "A photo?" I asked. "Just standard procedure. It helps show you're signing with full awareness," she said. Then almost too quickly, she added, "Don't worry, you look fine, just a little tired." Before I could respond, she was brushing my hair again. The strands fell forward. I flinched as the brush caught at the ends. "Stop," I said. She kept brushing. Caleb touched my shoulder again. Barely, but enough. Then she reached into her bag. The scissors were back. "Just a little neatening," she murmured. I turned my head to protest, but Caleb's hand pressed slightly firmer.
The first snip was fast. A lock of silver hair dropped into my lap. She kept going, calmly, humming again, the scissors clicking like clockwork. When she stepped back, my neck was cold. My scalp tingled with exposure. The binder was placed back in front of me. Emily stood behind Caleb now, arms folded, gaze steady. "We'll let you look it over again, but time's moving. We can't wait much longer." I didn't sign. Not then. Caleb didn't argue. He closed the binder, but the silence in the room had shifted. It wasn't passive anymore. It had weight, intention. Later, I locked myself in the bathroom. I finished cutting my hair to even out the rough edges. It didn't matter how it looked. It mattered that I did it. When I opened the drawer beneath the sink, I paused. Then, without knowing why, I folded the cut strands into a towel and placed them inside. Not to keep, not to mourn, just to make space. Something had broken in their performance, something that couldn't be brushed smooth again, and they knew it. They weren't waiting for permission anymore. They were waiting for surrender.
That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my side, facing the wall, clutching the edge of the blanket like it was a lifeline. My scalp was sensitive where the scissors had scraped, and every time I blinked, I saw silver strands falling to the floor in slow motion. Somewhere around 3 a.m, I got up quietly. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want them to hear the floor creak. I moved slow, careful, like I was tiptoeing through someone else's house. Because by then, that's how it felt. Like I no longer lived here. Like I was a guest in the place I had built. I made it to the kitchen. The windows were dark, the only light coming from the faint blue hum of the stove clock. I reached for a glass of water and then I heard it. Voices. Low, sharp, coming from down the hallway. I followed them silently, stepping close to the wall. Emily's voice first. Cold, edged. If she doesn't sign by Friday, it'll complicate everything. We've already pushed the meeting once. Caleb answered, but softer, almost tired. I know. I didn't think it would take this long. Emily again, firmer this time. She's stalling. You know she is. If we wait any longer, the taxes roll over and the account won't clear before the refinance. There was a long pause. Then Caleb said, maybe we should have just done it last year, when she was in recovery. A silence followed that made my stomach twist. I stepped back, slowly. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but something worse. The realization that I wasn't just being pressured, I was being removed. This wasn't about help. This wasn't about love. This was about strategy. I backed down the hallway, one hand on the wall to steady myself. When I reached my bedroom, I shut the door gently and leaned against it, my heart thudding in my chest. That moment was when everything shifted. Not the words. I had heard worse. But the clarity, the tone, the language of people who had already made decisions, who were no longer trying to convince, just trying to close the deal. They didn't see me as a mother anymore. They saw me as an obstacle. That night, I opened my notebook. The small one I kept in my nightstand, the one with worn corners and a ribbon I never used. I wrote down everything I could remember from the last few days. Emily's phrases, Caleb's silences, the way the office door had been left open. I wrote until my fingers cramped. Then I tore out the page and folded it into the pocket of my coat. I wasn't ready to fight, but I was done playing along.
I waited until late morning. The house was unusually still. Caleb had gone into town. I heard the car pull out around 9. Emily stayed behind. I could hear her on the phone in the guest room, her voice muffled, clipped. I didn't leave my room right away. I sat at the edge of the bed, holding the small notebook in my hands, the page I'd written the night before, now folded twice in my coat pocket. My pulse had slowed, but something deeper inside me had begun to stir, a quiet kind of resolve. By 10, I was dressed, not for comfort, but for presence. Slacks, a blouse, a cardigan with buttons that had to be coaxed through their loops. It was hard to bend, but I did it. I pulled my hair back, such as it was, and tied a scarf around it. The same scarf Emily had given me last Christmas, pale blue silk with tiny stitched feathers. I walked out into the living room. Emily was at the dining table now, sorting papers again. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "I need to make a call," I said. She opened her mouth to respond, but then thought better of it. She nodded once and went back to her papers. I picked up the landline in the kitchen. I didn't want to use my cell. I didn't want anything traced, remembered, or interrupted. I closed the folding door to the pantry and sat on the small stool where I used to rest while waiting for bread to rise. Then I dialed. Miriam answered on the third ring. "Miriam, it's me," I said. There was a pause, just long enough to carry 10 years' worth of distance. Then she said, "Oh my God, are you okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm working on it." Her voice softened. "Tell me everything." I did. Slowly, carefully. I told her about the surgery, the visit, the documents. I didn't cry, and I didn't dramatize. Just facts, one after another, like fence posts driven into frozen ground. Miriam didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then she said, "You need a lawyer." "I thought so," I said, "but I don't know where to start." "I do." She gave me a name, Elaine Redding, and a number. She's local, tough, quiet. She handles elder financial abuse cases. You won't have to explain much. I wrote it down. My hand shook slightly. "Can you meet her?" Miriam asked. "If someone drives me." "I'll come get you." I smiled. "You still drive that awful green car?" "It's blue now," she said, laughing. "But yes." We hung up. I placed the phone down gently, tucked the note into my pocket. Then I walked back into the living room. Emily didn't look up. I didn't say a word. But for the first time since they'd arrived, I felt taller.
Miriam arrived the next morning just after 9. She pulled into the driveway in a boxy blue sedan that rattled when it idled. I was already dressed and waiting, sitting on the edge of the armchair near the window with my coat draped across my knees. Emily didn't ask where I was going. She only watched from the kitchen as I struggled to my feet. Her face was carefully blank, her eyes tracking me like I might suddenly do something wild, like run. "Don't forget your tea," she said, placing a travel mug on the counter. I left it untouched. Miriam stepped out of the car the moment she saw me. She didn't rush or wave, just opened the passenger door and waited while I made my way down the porch steps. The wind was sharp. I didn't look back. Once I was in the car, she pulled away. "I'm glad you called," she said after a moment. "I never stopped wondering about you. I wasn't ready to talk before." She nodded. "You don't have to explain. You just have to let me help." The ride into town was quiet. The roads were dry, the trees skeletal with winter. As we passed familiar landmarks, the old gas station, the shuttered diner, I felt like I was moving through a ghost version of my own life. Elaine Redding's office was in a modest brick building near the courthouse. No sign, no receptionist, just a small plaque on the door that read, E. Redding, ESQ. She opened the door herself. Elaine was in her late 50s, tall, with calm eyes and a voice that sounded like it had been trained not to rush. She greeted Miriam with a brief nod, then turned to me and held out her hand. "You must be her. Come in." Her office was clean but not sterile. Stacks of paper, a half-full mug of coffee, and a worn armchair positioned beside her desk.
She gestured for me to sit. "Take your time," she said. "Start where it makes sense to you." And so I did. I started with the surgery, the visit, the binder, the scissors. I didn't cry. I didn't dramatize. The words came out flat, heavy, like I was describing the weather, and in some way I was, the emotional climate I'd been surviving. Elaine took notes, fast but quiet. When I paused, she waited. When I faltered, she didn't fill the silence. After I finished, she opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "You were right to come, and lucky to have Miriam," she said. She flipped to a page and tapped a paragraph with her pen. "This language here, it's coercive. Combined with the changes you describe, it builds a clear case of undue influence, especially with no notary signature." I nodded, though the words made my chest tighten. "What happens now?" I asked. "We begin quietly," she said. "There's no need for confrontation yet. We'll freeze things before they move out of your hands." She explained how we would file a temporary injunction, how she'd request a financial audit, how they'd be legally blocked from transferring or accessing anything further. It all sounded like a blueprint, like someone had finally drawn me a map through the fog. By the time we left the office, the wind had picked up, but I felt warmer. Miriam dropped me at her house. Her guest room was clean, the bed freshly made, and there was a stack of magazines beside the nightstand, like she'd known I was coming long before I did. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a long breath. The air smelled like lemon and wool. I wasn't home. Not yet. But I wasn't where they left me either. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had returned to myself.
The next morning, I woke before dawn. The guest room was still and quiet, a thin layer of frost glazing the outside of the window. Miriam had left a kettle on the stove and a note by the sink. "Take your time, you're safe." I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth ease the ache in my joints. My mind was sharper now. I could see clearly the small ways I had been pushed. Not violently, not loudly, but consistently. Elaine had told me not to go back to the house, not until the injunction was filed. But I couldn't leave without retrieving the original deed copies I kept locked in the desk drawer, the ones with my husband's signature, the ones no one else knew existed. By 10 o'clock, Miriam and I were back in her car. We didn't say much on the ride. She knew what I was about to do, and she didn't question it. Emily and Caleb weren't home. Their car was gone. The house felt oddly hollow when I stepped inside, like a stage waiting for actors who wouldn't return until after intermission. I moved quickly. In the office, I opened the bottom drawer of the old roll-top desk. As expected, the files had been tampered with, but my folder, the one labeled Founding Deed, was still there, tucked behind a row of insurance forms. I pulled it out and flipped through the pages. Everything was intact. Then I noticed something new. A Post-it note, yellowed at the edge, 3 words in Caleb's handwriting. "Let's do this." My breath caught, not in fear, in confirmation. They weren't just discussing, they were executing, together, with intention. I placed the folder into my tote, zipped it, and stood still for a moment. I looked around the room, the walls, the faded rug, the bookshelf that still held my husband's records. So much had happened here, and yet I felt no pull to stay. Before leaving, I walked through the kitchen. The travel mug Emily had offered still sat on the counter. I picked it up, opened the lid, and sniffed. Faintly herbal, but bitter underneath. I poured it down the sink. Then I left, quietly, deliberately. Back at Miriam's, I placed the deed into a separate envelope and slid it into the inside lining of my coat. I wanted it on me, not because I didn't trust her, but because I finally trusted myself. Elaine called that afternoon. The injunction had been submitted. It would be reviewed within 48 hours. "You've done the hardest part," she said. No, I'm just getting started."
The call from Elaine came just after lunch. I'd been staring out the window, watching a pair of sparrows flit between the bare branches. The moment I picked up and heard her voice, I knew something had changed. "It's official," she said. "The judge approved the injunction. Effective immediately, no legal changes can be made to your estate, finances, or property without your express, documented consent." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Thank you," I said. "You did this," she replied, "not me." I hung up and sat very still. The house was quiet. Miriam was out for groceries, and the silence felt sacred, like the sound after a storm has passed. I wasn't free yet, but I was no longer defenseless. Later that afternoon, a courier arrived with a thick envelope. Inside were the official court filings, stamped and dated, the first real evidence that the tide had turned. I placed them on the table and read each line carefully, tracing the ink with my finger like I used to when helping Caleb with his homework. There was power in the page, not just legal power, personal power, ownership. By early evening, Miriam returned. She found me in the kitchen, still holding the papers. "Looks like good news," she said, setting down a paper bag. I nodded. "We've bought time. Maybe more." She smiled gently. "You know, there was a time when I thought you'd never call, and now you're writing a new ending." I didn't answer. Instead, I folded the documents and slid them into a new folder labeled in my own handwriting, "Protection." That night, I didn't dream. Or if I did, I didn't remember. But when I woke, I felt something different. Ready. 3 days after the injunction, a letter arrived at Miriam's house. No return address, just my name written in Caleb's familiar hand. Miriam found it in the mailbox and handed it to me without a word. I held it for a while before opening it, as if the paper itself might burn. Inside were 2 paragraphs. The first said they were worried, that Emily had cried when they realized I'd left without saying the guy, that they'd been trying to help. Caleb wrote that they never meant to cause harm, only to prepare for the future. The second paragraph shifted. It warned that legal action could hurt everyone, that dragging things into the public eye would cause more damage than necessary. He ended by saying it wasn't too late to undo all of this. Tucked behind the letter was a photo. Old. Me, Caleb, and his father. A summer picnic, I think. Caleb couldn't have been older than 10. His face was open, bright, full of joy. I placed the photo face down on the kitchen table. Not out of spite, just clarity. That night, I sat with Miriam by the fireplace. I read the letter out loud. She didn't comment right away. She simply poured more tea, then said, "He's still trying to narrate your story." "I won't let him," I said quietly. We made a list that night. A real list. The accounts that needed separating. The documents that needed locking. The passwords I hadn't changed in years. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. The next morning, I called Elaine. She listened as I read the letter to her. When I finished, there was a long pause. "We proceed," she said. "This only confirms how necessary your boundaries are." And so we did. Step by step. Legal, clear, unwavering. Mine. Spring arrived slowly that year. The trees outside Miriam's house began to blush with new green, and the air softened into something close to warm. I began to walk in the mornings, wrapped in a shawl, notebook tucked beneath my arm. One morning, after a quiet breakfast, Miriam placed a thin manila envelope on the kitchen table. "The last of the banking paperwork," she said. "You just need to sign." I opened it, read it line by line, and signed with a steady hand. It was done. Everything that had once been tangled, compromised, or vulnerable had been set right. My name was mine again. The cottage had become more than a refuge. It had become a mirror, a place where I had been forced to look at myself, not as mother or widow or caretaker, but as a woman reclaiming her voice. Not loud, not angry, just true. Elaine stopped by later that week. She brought fresh copies of the legal documents, all finalized. "We did good work," she said. I corrected her with a smile. "We did necessary work." A few days later, another letter came. This one was from the Regional Community College. They were confirming my talk at the Estate Literacy Workshop. A 40-minute session, a modest turnout expected. I said yes. On the day of the talk, I wore a soft navy sweater and the silver earrings I'd stopped wearing years ago. Not because I needed to feel pretty, but because they reminded me I could. The classroom was small, the kind with humming fluorescent lights and chipped paint near the floorboards. 14 women sat in a semicircle, some older than me, some younger, all watching. I told them my story. Not every detail, not the scissors or the silence, but the heart of it. How easy it was to lose your place in your own life, and how powerful it was to reclaim it, paper by paper, word by word. After the talk, one woman approached me. Her name was Lorna. She looked tired but sharp. "My daughter convinced me to sign over my house last fall," she said. "I haven't told anyone until now." I nodded. "It's not too late," I said. Back at the cottage that evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, the pines rustled gently. I felt something new. Not peace exactly, but steadiness. The kind of quiet that asks nothing of you but honesty. I picked up my pen and opened my journal. Today, I wrote, "I chose myself, and I will again tomorrow."
Did this story stir something inside you? Drop a comment if you've ever had to take back your life, or if you're ready to. Like, reshare, and subscribe for more stories that empower. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of resilience. Your voice matters. Don't let silence write your story.